Hey everyone, this is the short lecture on Aquinas and especially on the 5 ways of showing that God exists. So, um, before I get into the 5 ways, I want to say a little bit about Aquinas' disagreement with Anselm over the ontological argument. So remember that when we talked about the ontological argument, one of the things that has to be in place for that argument to work is that the word God has to mean something greater than which nothing can be conceived. And if that's not what the word God means, then Anselm's proof doesn't really show that God exists. So this is a place where Aquinas actually picks this up and disagrees with Anselm, saying that, we don't really know that that's what the word God means. Some people have understood other things by God, and so maybe they're right. If Anselm's proof, the ontological argument, is going to go through, then it looks like there needs to be extra argumentation showing that what the word God means really is something greater than which nothing can be conceived. Okay, so let's talk about the 5 ways. The first 3 ways that Aquinas has are actually quite similar. They look different, but the overall structure is pretty much the same. So the idea is that with the first way, change, and the second way, efficient causation, and the third way, possibility and necessity, what he does is shows that there is a series of things that has to exist, and the series can't go on for infinity. It has to go back and stop at some point. And so where it stops, the very first thing in the series is the thing that we would call God. So if we take the argument from change, for example, he points out that if things change in the world, then something has to have made them change, and that thing can't be the thing that changed. It's got to be some other thing, right? Things don't make themselves change, but they're changed by other things. So you can think of changes as happening in a series, right? A change is preceded by some other thing that made it change, which is preceded by some other thing that made it change, and all the way back on down a series. The series can't go on to infinity, Aquinas thinks, and so it has to start somewhere. Where does it start? With the very first cause, which we would call God. And this is the same form of argument for the second and third way of showing that God exists as well. They vary slightly in the details, and you can look at the text for those, but the overall structure is quite the same. The fourth way is a bit different. The fourth way appeals to the gradations found in nature. So Aquinas points out that all kinds of things come on gradations, right? There's things that are hotter, things that are colder. That's a gradation from hot at one end to cold at the other. And this is true for lots of other things as well. So we can think of, instead of temperature, something like shape, right? There's like something that's round at one end and maybe something that's square at the other. And there's a gradation of shapes in between from round to square. When you have gradations like these, Aquinas follows Aristotle in thinking that the thing at the very limits of the gradation define or cause the things in the middle. So the very hottest thing at the very top of the scale of hot and cold, that causes heat in all other things that are less hot than that. Well, we can also think about a gradation of goodness, right? We can think of things very good at one end, things very bad at the other, and then a gradation of goodness and badness in between. And if you think about the thing at the very top of that scale, the very best thing, the most good thing, that's going to be, Aquinas thinks, God. God is the most good thing, and God is going to cause goodness in all of the other things that are intermediary along the scale. This is not just the case for goodness, but also for the other perfections, as he says. So we can think of things like knowledge. You can think of most knowledgeable at one end, most ignorant at the other end, and at the very top of the knowledge scale, you have the most knowledgeable thing that causes knowledge in all other things, and that's the kind of thing that will also be, Aquinas thinks, called God. Finally, we have the fifth way, which is an argument from government and purpose. And this is a little tricky, but it's going to be pretty similar to what we find in Paley later on. And the idea is that everything in nature has some kind of purpose to it, or so Aquinas thinks. And the purpose of inanimate objects is always provided to them by some intelligent being. So the example of the arrow, right? The arrow is an inanimate object. It does what it's supposed to do, right? It flies when you string it up to a bow and let it go. And the reason that it fulfills that purpose is because intelligent beings made it to do so. Well, now if you look at the cosmos, it looks like all things within it work to their purpose as well. They do what they're intended to do. They're governed in a way. And there must have been some intelligent agent, by analogy, that gives them that purpose and makes them fulfill it. And that intelligent agent, Aquinas says, we would call God. So all told, those are 5 different ways of showing that God exists. And I'm going to leave it at that. We'll pick up the last one a little bit in the future when we talk about Paley.